and welcome to today's webinar for mental health professionals, Resisting Myths and Reducing Shame, Understanding the Impact of Rape Culture on the Prevalence of Sexual Assault within the African American Community, featuring Carmel Brown, licensed clinical social worker. My name is Susan Bailey. I'm the Senior Manager of Professional Development here at ADAA. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's webinar. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. You have joined the presentation listening using your computer's audio system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select Phone Call in the audio panel and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will also have the opportunity to submit text questions at any time of the presentation by typing your questions into the chat box of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A sessions throughout the presentation. If you registered and paid for CE credit, you'll need to provide the 4-letter CE code in the webinar evaluation. The CE code will be shared at the end of the presentation. You'll receive a follow-up email, including the webinar evaluation, webinar recording, and post-test assessment for those seeking CE credit. You will also have an opportunity to complete the post-test assessment after the presentation. The questions will appear on your screen, and you'll be given 5 minutes to complete the assessment. Once complete, please hit Submit. I would now like to introduce Carmel Brown. Ms. Brown is a long-term resident of Chicago, but is a native of the Bahamas. She came to Chicago to attend graduate school at the University of Chicago in the School of Social Service Administration, fell in love with the city and its people, and has remained. In addition to her master's in Social Service Administration, Carmel also has a BSW from Oakwood University in Huntsville, Alabama. She has completed 4 years postgraduate studies at the University of Illinois at Chicago, has completed Advanced Psychodynamic Clinical Practice Fellowship Program at the University of Chicago, and has extensive training in nonprofit management from Axelson Center at the North Park University. She is a certified instructor for the Crisis Prevention Institute, trained in the principles of motivational interviewing, MI, and its fidelity measures. Carmel has over 20 years of progressively responsible management experience and has provided training and in-service opportunities on a local and national level. She is a certified forensic interviewer and is the director of MDT coordination at the Chicago Children's Advocacy Center. I'm now going to take a moment to pass the screen to our expert. There will be a brief pause while I do so.
All right, can everybody hear me? Okay, excellent, great. It looks like, oh wait. Can everybody hear me? It looks like my webinar is, the camera isn't showing. I'm going to go ahead and continue. Unless I get some objection that you guys aren't able to hear me. Let me know if you aren't. I don't know if you guys, okay, here we go. Share my webcam is coming. All right, good. All right, yay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. I apologize for that very brief delay. Welcome. My name is Carmel Brown, and as mentioned, I am the Director of MDT Coordination here at the Chicago CAC. The Chicago CAC has won over 1,000 children's advocacy centers operating in the United States and in more than 34 countries throughout the world. And at the Chicago CAC, we respond to reports of child sexual abuse as part of a team of experts. And together we investigate abuse, we conduct forensic interviews, we provide advocacy, we address trauma, and we try to identify resources so that children and families can begin the healing process. All right, so why do we need to talk about sexual assault? In the United States today alone, there are 17.7 million women who've had encounters of attempted or completed rape. 1 in 4 women will be raped in their lifetime. 1 in 6 boys and 1 in 4 girls are sexually abused before the age of 18. So that's why we need to talk about sexual assault. Today, we're going to be talking about rape myths and how they support and perpetuate a rape culture. We're going to be talking about how prevalent rape myth acceptance is in the helping sector, and how the professional community's acceptance of rape myths may impact their ability to serve survivors in an effective manner. We're going to talk about history, we're going to talk about slavery, we're going to talk about racism, we're going to talk about how all of those things may impact a survivor's willingness to disclose sexual assault. We're going to talk about just world beliefs. We're going to be able to talk a little bit and give you enough tools so that you can challenge your own rape myth acceptance. We're going to briefly discuss the concept of trauma, but we also end the training with a brief discussion of the forms of treatment most effective for rape survivors, including a discussion of therapeutic empathy as a form of treatment. So, what are rape myths? Rape myths are those theories and ideas that are created to explain and thus provide comfort to individuals on how and why rape and sexual assaults occur to a certain class or type of individual as opposed to others. Rape myths provide a view of the world that is safe, that is orderly and explainable, because it allows the blame for the sexual assault to lie not with the offender, but with the victim. And in doing so, they provide a false sense of security because they are fundamentally untrue. And they also sustain a culture where rape and sexual assault are excusable. And in essence, they make it difficult to hold individuals who offend accountable for their own actions. How many people remember the 1970s TV series All in the Family? And I might be aging myself now, but the protagonist of the series was a man called Archie Bunker. And Archie Bunker was a racist. And that was actually the foundation of the whole series. He was a racist, and he believed certain things about Black people, actually all minorities. Then Archie Bunker met George Jefferson, and he liked him. And then he had this period of what we would call cognitive dissonance, because he either had to accept that he had been wrong about Black men and minorities, or he had to make a decision to either adapt and adjust his new viewpoint of George Jefferson with his old viewpoint of racism. And so he had option A, I'm wrong, option B, then I'm right, but George Jefferson is an aberration. He is abnormal. He's outside the normal curve. And so what Archie Bunker did was he chose option B. He chose to exist within his comfort zone by saying that George Jefferson was an aberration. He was not normal. Rape myths give people an option B. They help to keep a view of the world that keeps us safe and sane. And when we do choose the option B, it says that the victim was the problem. And so examples of that, only bad girls or women are raped, individuals who are raped ask for it. So rape myths are very prevalent in culture, in the American culture. More than 50% of the population support or endorse rape myths. And, which is sad to say, they're very pervasive in the legal, law enforcement, medical fields. They are prevalent in the mental health field, the behavioral health field, and in also the clergy. As you look through the slide, you will see pictures from a project that focused on the comments and statements that were made to survivors after they disclosed their abuse. And so I encourage you to take a look at those pictures afterwards, and you will see how prevalent rape myths are and how hurtful they can be. So I'll go through a few of the most prevalent rape myths. One, sexual assault, rape, sexual abuse are committed by strangers. This is not true. In fact, we know that 80% of people who have committed or offended in some sexual assaultive way are known to either the child or the family members. To break it down even more, 60% of perpetrators of sexual abuse are known to the child. About 30% of perpetrators are actually family members, and about 23% of abusers, child sexual abusers, are actually individuals under the age of 18. So their peers, their brothers, their sisters, and they're people that they know in a teen or social setting. And 70% of sexual assaults that happen to children or teenagers actually occur in the home of the victim, the offender, or a friend. Another myth that is actually pretty common is that women who dress provocatively or go to somebody's home or accompany someone to a bar takes on the risk of being sexually assaulted. And if you look at the picture I have on the slide, this was said to a victim by the police department when she actually went to report her abuse. And the reality of it is that we can replace dress provocatively with any number of different words. Intoxicated, flirts with men, hitchhiker. The truth is, no one deserves to be raped. No one deserves to be sexually assaulted. It doesn't matter what they're doing. It doesn't matter what they're wearing. It is not up to someone to avoid being raped. It is the obligation of the abuser or the rapist to decide not to rape or commit sexual assault. And so we know the rape is never the victim's fault. However, this is a clearly prevalent myth that is actually very much seen in our world today. Another myth that we know is that everyone who is actually assaulted reports the crime immediately to the police. And if they didn't report it, or if there was a delay in reporting, then they must not have been raped or sexually assaulted. And this is really dangerous because it's very much not true. Only about 3 in 10 rapes or sexual assaults are ever reported to law enforcement. And there are many reasons. At the Chicago CAC, we work with 17 and under, victims who are 17 and under. And we have very rarely had situations where people who have been assaulted or sexually abused actually come right out the next day or that same week to actually report sexual abuse. We have a term for it. It's called delayed disclosure or delayed outcry. It's very common because what most children are worried about or wondering about is what will happen when I report this. They're afraid of the negative reaction from their parents, or they're afraid of being harmed by the abuser. And so many times children delay disclosure until adulthood. We know that males often delay disclosure because within our society, many men feel pressure to be proud of early sexual activity, regardless of whether it's unwanted. And also, men also have to worry about being labeled as as gay or somebody who is engaged in a homosexual act. And so many times men never report or give a disclosure. So one of the things that is clear is that many barriers to disclosure. So now we're going to talk about a few common barriers. Again, 50% of the population endorse rape myths. That includes victims of rape and sexual assault. So if you look at some of the pictures on the slide, you see some of the statements that were made to victims after or during their assault. Is it likely that if 50% of the population endorse rape myths, that victims also endorse those myths? And is it likely that their own beliefs about their behavior thus contributes to their abuse, impacting their willingness to disclose? It's highly likely. And so many women, many men will not report their abuse because they're having to deal with did I create this situation? Did I cause this situation for myself? Now, women of color have the highest rates of non-disclosure of any other ethnic population. And what we also know is while women of color have the highest rate of non-disclosure, they are actually overrepresented in terms of sexual assault, victims of sexual assault. In fact, they're overrepresented when it comes to any element of intimate partner violence. We know that domestic violence can happen to anyone, anywhere, and it is not predicated by socioeconomic status. However, African American females have the highest rate of violent victimization of any racial group. They're 3 times as likely to experience a lethal domestic violence event than any other racial group in America. In fact, domestic violence murders are the leading cause of death of Black women between the ages of 15 to 35. In fact, across many ages, the leading or the secondary cause of death for African American girls and women is homicide. Just as an example, between the ages, of 1 to 4, homicide is the second leading cause of death for Black girls. So if so much violence is happening to Black women in particular, why don't they disclose? I'll tell you a little story. When the Surviving R. Kelly documentary, I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with that, but a Surviving R. Kelly documentary came out, I want to say about a year ago. And when the documentary came out and was aired, many of the Chicago CAC staff went to social media to share their thoughts and their comments and to see what other people were sharing. And when we did it, we were shocked by some of the comments that were made by people. And we're not talking about comments being made by strangers. The comments were being made by close friends, our loved ones, our family, and colleagues. And then we were even more puzzled when we found out that R. Kelly's sales had also increased. So we began to do some research. And we discovered that this reaction was not uncommon. When confronted with the allegations where the offender is a Black man of power, prestige, wealth, and influence, inevitably the victims become the target of hostility. This happened with Mike Tyson. It happened with Bill Cosby, and it happened with R. Kelly. Now, this is not unique to the Black community, by the way. There's a very similar action that occurs to those people who confront other men of power. We only have to look at Donald Trump. But why does this happen, and why does it happen with African American women? So why didn't alleged victims of R. Kelly speak up immediately? Why did they wait for 20 years? One of the biggest barriers faced by African American females who choose to disclose their abuse is a hostile environment and a tendency towards justification when the alleged offender happens to be a man of influence. When confronted with a choice to see either a hero, a man who has pulled himself up by his bootstraps and has risen to the top of his career in his chosen field, whether that be sports, comedy, music, individuals are confronted with a choice, just as Archie Bunker was confronted with a choice. Option A, is this person a predator? Option B, is this person a victim? If we go with option A, we then have to believe that the man who wrote, "I Believe I Can Fly," or "You Saved Me," and those are two of the very common titles of songs that R. Kelly wrote. "I Believe I Can Fly" is played on choirs, it's played in churches, it's played at graduation, it's played at weddings. "You Saved Me" is a song that is sung by choirs as well. So we have to believe that a man who could write those songs, the songs of a generation, could be a predator, and that we have aligned ourselves with somebody who could do something so evil. We have to believe that the father from a beloved sitcom like the Cosbys could be evil in some way, because again, we have connected him with a function of our childhood that is powerful and that's positive. So we can't believe that. And so our option is to either go to predator or go to victim. And many times people go to victim. let's talk a little bit. So now we're going to talk a little bit about those specific concepts that are unique to African Americans and why they have issues with disclosing and why they have most difficulty when it's a man of power. We're going to talk about the internalization of racist and stereotypical ideas and strength. And we're going to talk about racial loyalty. So the context of rape for African American women are different from other ethnicities. What we do know is that during slavery, rape and exploitation served a purpose of power and control and oppression. Before the Civil War, sexual exploitation and rape were legitimized because African American women or African women were able to be stereotyped and stigmatized as sexually uninhibited and morally bankrupt. And so this led to the creation of the rape myth that Black women, African women, could not be exploited because they enjoyed sex so much that they welcomed all sexual advances. So, and this was seen after slavery until the late 1950s. The majority of Black women employed outside of the home were employed in domestic roles in homes. And what we know to be true from research and history is that many of these individuals were repeatedly assaulted by male employers. However, until the late 1960s, no Southern white male had ever been convicted of raping or attempting to rape a Black woman. In 1969, the National Commission on the Causes and Prevention of Violence admitted that even though there were only few reported instances of sexual assault by white men against Black women, that this did not reflect that crime wasn't happening, but it reflects the fact that white males, in quotations, have long had nearly institutionalized access to Negro women with relatively little fear of being reported. This was not unique to just white perpetrators. When a Black man raped a Black woman, police consistently reported the crime as unfounded. And for the majority of the 19th century, Southern juries questioned the credibility of every Black woman who was a rape victim, even when the perpetrator was Black. Moving up, in 1995, research was done by college students looking at the perceived effects of rape. And what they found was that when the victim of a rape or sexual assault was a Black victim, these college students found it more likely to perceive it as all right or as an act of love when compared to a white male victim, a white rape victim. So what we have found is that there are three dominant paradigms of Black femininity that originated in the South and that continue to persist in this present day. And all three of these stereotypes paint Black women as hypersexual, aggressive, and boisterous. Each stereotype justified the behavior perpetrated against women in the South slave system, but also are totally seen today and impact Black women today. The first concept is the concept of the Jezebel. And so the image of the Jezebel is someone who is seen as an aggressive predator who is sexually irresponsible. So under this image, society will believe that these individuals cannot be victims of sexual assault or rape. They're constantly seeking sexual pleasure and then thus provoking the violence. Present day Jezebels are labeled as hoochies, hood rats, dots, welfare queens. And even though the labels may vary, the perception remains the same. Then we have the concept of the mammy. And so the mammy image was defined as an African American woman who was asexual. She was obese. She was an older woman, large breasts, and she was working in servitude. And her primary goal was to be a subordinate who performed her duties in a domestic fashion with a broad grin and with no expectation of payment. And so how would the mommy role contribute to these barriers? Because the mommy was expected to fulfill multiple roles within their own environment without having their needs met and having to endure the abuse with a patient and passive air. They were expected to be loyal, and they were expected to feel some level of pressure to endure the abuse without placing their violent boyfriends or husbands in the criminal justice system. And this is still seen today by church members or community leaders or religious leaders who encourage African American women to keep their family together, to stay in toxic relationships because they're linking this to this negative depiction of women. And so as providers, it's really important to pay attention that this stereotype does not influence you influence you as you work with this population, because if under this influence, there's a tendency to overestimate the African American women's ability to cope with abuse. And then there's this belief that they are accustomed to adversity. I've heard all my life Black women say, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, or God does not give me more than I can bear, and I just have to endure. My reward is in heaven, not on earth. So it's very common. And if you go back and look at videos or movies, you will see both the mommy and the Jezebel. You'll also see the third one, the sapphire. And the sapphire is that concept of the angry Black woman. You know, they're seen as bitter, as hostile, they're dangerous, they're threatening to society. They are very commonly seen in media, in movies, and videos. So when an angry Black woman is viewed, men can justify violence towards a sapphire as an option for punishment because of their defiant behavior. And oftentimes, again, these women aren't taking on these own stereotypes. They will come to believe that the assault or abuse is deserved because of their own behavior. And how it impacts providers is that a sapphire can also cause an African American woman to underestimate her need for protection, for support, for even medical attention, because she feels that she can handle it, because her mother handled it, her sister handled it, other people in her life handle it, so can she. And also, because of that acceptance of the internal stereotype, they may present as angry and hostile. And it may impact a provider's willingness to provide services because they're overlooking them as a need because they're not willing to show vulnerability. All of these stereotypes have one thing in mind, and that thing is the concept of strong Black woman. And all of you have heard about it. I've heard about it the entirety of my life. And the concept of the strong Black woman is typically seen as a good thing. Why wouldn't we want to be strong? But in the case of an African American survivor, assault survivor, embracing the persona of the strong Black woman is directly associated with a culture of silence. Many studies have been done on African American sexual assault survivors. And the common statements are, for example, Black women are accustomed to hard times. Getting sexually abused is just one more thing. We just have to endure it. And approximately half of women who do not seek counseling when involved in the research conceptualized that they did not seek counseling because they saw inner strength as a necessity and they minimized what had happened to them. So they're generally reluctant to talk about it because when they do disclose abuse, they have to then be seen as weak and vulnerable. And that is something that the culture and this notion of the strong Black woman is strongly against. So here's a video that talks a little bit more about the second aspect of why Black women don't disclose. One of the main reasons for lack of disclosure has been found to be racial loyalty. In a study of African American women who experienced an attempted or completed sexual assault, we found that there's a cultural specific barrier to disclosure. I didn't want to tell because the person who attacked me was Black. Many women who have been assaulted have this cultural mandate to protect Black men because of the fact that historically there have been many false accusations of sexual assault against African American males. And also because many African males have been perpetuated and have had unfair treatment in many other domains, work, military, school. So many women feel an allegiance to protect these men from what they perceive to be unfair treatment by the criminal justice system. And so they don't disclose because they don't want to be part of that continued assault against Black men. But where does this allegiance come from? So unfortunately, it looks like I just got a notification that you guys can't hear the video. What I'll do is I will actually send a link out so that you can watch the video, and that's unfortunate. But what she talks a little bit about is that there is this concept, there's this new system, or there's this new movement on Twitter that calls first them, then us. And it basically says that before a Black man like R. Kelly or Bill Cosby should be prosecuted for their behavior, that all white men should first have to endure of some level of punishment because of that. And what that means and what that does is that it does reduce the importance of Black girls and Black women, and say that they actually have to be served on this platter of cultural loyalty. And what's sad about that, it says that we cannot hold Black men accountable to their behavior at the same, and we do not support or are proud or will help and encourage Black girls and women as long as Black men suffer racism and discrimination. It doesn't mean that as a Black woman that I cannot see the evil that a Black man does. And until we actually get to the point where we're willing to acknowledge that it's not first them and then us, but that we have an obligation to protect Black girls just as much as all women of any ethnicity, we will continue to have this problem. So unfortunately, you guys weren't able to see this video, which means you probably won't be able to see the other video that I have, but I'll send it to you. So let's keep going. So as mentioned, in comparison to women of other races and ethnicities, Black African-American women are the least likely to report being assaulted by authorities. There's research that's done on a concept called adultification of Black girls. And when this research was done, it showed that Black girls are viewed by all adults, that includes Black women, Black men, all adults, regardless of ethnicity. They are viewed in a different way when compared to white girls of the same age. Research has found that adults believe that Black girls need less nurturing, Black girls need less protection, Black girls need to be supported less, they need to be comforted less. They're more independent, they know more about adult topics, and they know more about sex. So these results are profound, and they have far-reaching implications. If a Black girl is seen as more adult-like, it takes away the protective mechanisms that are inherent within childhood. Children make mistakes. We know that the brain is not developed or mature until the mid-20s. And to assume that a Black girl as early as the age of 5 is more aware of what is happening, it also assumes culpability. And what that means, unfortunately, you probably won't be able to watch this slide. So what I will do is I will also make sure you guys have access to that. What it means is that if authorities and public systems view Black girls as less innocent, less needing of protection, and generally more like adults, it also means they will view Black girls as more culpable for their actions, and on that basis punish them more harshly despite their status as children. So in this picture, you see a Florida police officer who arrested a 6-year-old because she had a temper tantrum. She was handcuffed, she was fingerprinted, and she was taken to juvenile detention and charged with battery. Now, she was charged with battery. From my understanding, she didn't actually assault anybody, but she had a temper tantrum and was flailing her arms and doing things. So it's noted this is a bias across all racial gender lines. It serves, adultification serves as a contributing cause of harsher school discipline, harsher treatment by law enforcement, and bias by officials in the juvenile justice system. It also speaks to the greater number of Black girls who are sexually abused, because it also speaks to how importantly, or it also speaks to how their abuse is viewed by members of the public. The assumption may be that they were equal participants in their abuse because they're not seen as young girls, but as young adults. I mean, can you imagine arresting all 6-year-olds who ever have had a temper tantrum? Can you imagine? It implies a level of moral and emotional maturity that most children and many adults, and sadly, many adolescents do not have. But this is an example of adultification. So let's get to treatment, and then we'll get to some questions if you have any. What are the implications for treatment? We know that rape is linked to PTSD. Around 90% of the survivors of sexual assault rape meet the criteria for PTSD. Treatment, thus, is usually focused on treating the symptomology of PTSD, CBT, PE, EMDR. So it's found to be highly effective in relieving post-trauma anxiety. But what it has been found is to be restricted in their ability to address or reduce other symptoms such as self-blame. Rape, unlike any other form of trauma, involves extreme self-blame, guilt, shame, and isolation. And as I mentioned before, those types of self-blame, guilt have shown really poor responsiveness to treatment that only focuses on PTSD-specific treatment. And even as the forms of anxiety or symptomology that are specific to PTSD decline, it does not address the actual levels of self-blame and guilt. What should be noted is that rape victims are set apart from other trauma victims, as no other group of survivors are so often blamed for causing their trauma. So self-blame is found to be highest among all other trauma victims. And we're talking about people who have been involved in car accidents, plane accidents, people who observed a murder, people who have been robbed, all of these things. Self-blame for survivors of rape would be the highest of all victims. You will hear things like, how could I have been so stupid? Why did I go to his house? I am so disgusting. No one would ever want me again. You're not necessarily going to hear those same things if somebody was in a car accident. I am so disgusting. No one would ever want me again. Because the implication was that you are somehow to blame for what happened to you. So what we found is that rape victims' self-blame really is aligned with society's acceptance of rape myths and then just worldviews. So what are just worldviews? People who hold on to just worldviews believe that people get what they deserve. They believe in the concept of karma. So they provide a basis for people to make sense of the world because they view the world as orderly, as predictable, and fundamentally just. And so what research has shown is that people who endorse just worldviews have higher rape myth acceptance than people who do not. But as a therapist, as a provider, you may say, well, then I'll just address those rape myths and I'll just address those just world beliefs, and that will resolve it. But the contradiction in that is that just world reviews, just world beliefs, and rape myths also form a protective also have a protective function. So they provide a sense of control that is not true, illusionary, but this sense of control, as false as it might be, counteracts the feeling of helplessness that is inherent in rape, sexual assault, or abuse. So while you have to address this, there is going to be a level of resistance that comes from the survivors, because when you take away this concept, you're also saying that you are helpless in certain ways and you do not have control over the world. And that's going to be difficult for somebody who is trying to heal from the trauma of sexual assault. So how do we do that? What we encourage, or what I encourage, is therapeutic empathy. What is it? What's the goal of the therapeutic empathy? We want to communicate understanding, care, and concern. We got to clarify those thoughts. We got to validate how you feel. But we're really focusing on developing your own level, the survivor's own level of compassion and self-acceptance. And while doing so, we're going to reduce self-loathing and guilt. How do we do that? So as you go through the therapeutic process, you're going to be listening for those negative self-appraisals. You're going to be listening to those comments that imply, I did something wrong. You're going to be educating about social condemnation and rape myth acceptance. You're really going to be focusing on hearing those themes that you know do not speak to reality. You're also going to be talking about re-victimization. What we know is because rape myths and just world beliefs are endorsed by many people, including first responders, it is highly likely that many people, many survivors, have been re-victimized by the people who are supposed to care for them: doctors, lawyers, nurses, police officers. And so you have to then address that re-victimization as a form of secondary trauma, along with the trauma of the assault. And you will also need to normalize post-trauma symptomology, the way that you're feeling, the thoughts that you have, those emotions, those feelings of guilt and shame are normal. And they have to be seen as normal for somebody to be able to understand that I am not alone. One of the things that's most important is that you have to address the distorted cognitions of the survivor. You have to free this person from those negative self-evaluations through active restructuring, which is intended to really promote a different way of viewing the world. You're going to try to promote cognitive shifts. So you're going to reality test. You're going to process. For instance, one of the myths that exists is that a woman or man would not be raped if they fought hard enough. It's your responsibility to protect yourself. And so when you have to process this feeling of helplessness, you need to reality test, because you're going to say there are clear size and strength differentials. You know, for instance, if we have a survivor who is 5'2", 100 pounds, and she was assaulted by a male who was 6'3", 250 pounds, how likely is it that that person would be able to actually not be actually able to overpower that individual? So that's where reality testing comes in. But you also talk a little bit about the natural, unproductive responses to fear and anxiety that exist for most individuals. We know that when people are confronted with things that are scary, or when they're anxious, they freeze, they fight, or they flee. These can be very unproductive in situations such as sexual assault, but they are actually very common. So as you do reality testing, you're going to be reframing those comments and thoughts that people are saying. And in addition to that, you're going to provide information. You're going to address those internalized prejudicial attitudes that you're hearing this person say. But you're also going to be trying to distinguish between the concept of fault and the concept of ill-advised behavior. And what that means is, if I was hitchhiking, and in the process of hitchhiking, I was sexually assaulted, am I at fault for the sexual assault? I'm not. Did I engage in what may have been seen as an ill-advised behavior? Possibly. But does that directly mean that I am responsible for being raped or sexually assaulted? Absolutely not. And the example I might give is, we know that Boeing 747s are actually under investigation right now. If I were to get a flight on a Boeing 747, which I don't think I can because I don't think they're in the air, that might be an ill-advised behavior. But if that plane then crashed, it would not be my fault. I didn't create Boeing, didn't have anything to do with fixing it. And so it's important to really be able to distinguish those things. And if you are like, I could actually provide a lot of reading material that people may use in more details, because we only have a little bit of time. I also want to make sure that survivors understand the motivations of men who rape in order to reduce their self-blame. Men who rape have rape-supported attitudes. They apologies, and they blame the victim. So survivors need to understand the motivations of men. And there are many people who say that when doing treatment with survivors of sexual assault, there's a level of feminism that must be taken into place because of the nature of American history as a patriarchal society. And what I've given you are examples of terms that most of us have heard that show women as property or as objects, and actually may lead to some level of violence that is unintended. Almost done, guys, almost done. Here's an example of a negative self-appraisal and a positive therapeutic intervention. Therapeutic empathy: I should have been able to resist the assailant. Therapeutic empathy: your guilt sounds so unbearable. Reality testing: how big was he? How strong was he? And then information provision. I'm going to let you guys take a look at that. but that's an example of how you would address those things. One thing that's really important is that while you may think that there is a positive cumulative effect to positive social reactions, research shows that there isn't that doesn't happen. It's only negative. It's negative in a small way. However, negative social reactions actively hinder recovery, and they actually do have a cumulative effect over time. So the more negative social reactions that a survivor has, the more they're going to be harmed or hindered in their treatment recovery. And so it's really important that as providers, we avoid invalidating the survivor's experience in any way. And that's why it's so important as survivors that you are aware of your own prejudices, your own biases, and that you are able to see how you may contribute to secondary victimization through an unconscious acceptance of these biases. There are tools that you can use to assess where you are in terms of rape myth acceptance and your just world beliefs, and they are eye-opening. And I encourage you all to look at those measures and do it on yourself. Then don't feel bad about what your measure say, but just make it a goal of yours to address that. And examples might be, why did you decide to go to his home? Why did you wear that dress? Even simple statements like that, which may seem important to helping a person understand ill-advised behaviors, may impact the person in a negative way. And I've noted there is a positive correlation with long-term working with rape victims and rape myth acceptance. We don't have a lot of time to go into that, but that should be something that is considered or looked at. So there are implications for treatment prevention programs, but the main one is we need to train people not to commit sexual assault and rape, as opposed to teaching women and children how to avoid sexual assault. We have to stop blaming the victim. What can you do? What can you do? What you have to do, I think, more than anything, is that we all have to put survivors first. Black girls and Black women cannot be sacrificed on the idol of racial loyalty and pride. We have to believe, and we have to believe even those imperfect victims. We have to believe that victim that wore that provocative dress. We have to believe that victim who did break curfew. We have to believe that person who maybe did drink too much and who maybe did flirt with the wrong person, because even those imperfect victims do not deserve to be raped. Let me read this quote from an imperfect victim. I'm a Black woman who's a survivor of incest and rape. I was the young Black woman who, in 1989, at 19 years old, 6 weeks shy of my 20th birthday, broke the rules of the university where I attended by agreeing to sneak out after hours to meet the man who would become my rapist. I was the Black woman who paid for the hotel room where I was raped. I was the Black woman who said, I don't want to do this, please stop. I didn't violently fight back. I didn't scream or yell at the top of my lungs because I was afraid. I didn't want to make a scene. I told myself it was my fault because I willingly left the dorm. I ignored school policy, and I even paid for the hotel room. I am one of the countless, nameless, and voiceless women who have learned that the punishment for women who use poor judgment with men is rape and other forms of sexual violence. This is a quote from an imperfect victim. And I end my brief hour by letting you know that if you are interested in any of the information that I shared with you today, I am willing to take emails. Feel free to reach out to me. I will provide any information that I have, and I will absolutely send you guys the videos that you were not able to see. And also, all of the pictures that I had on the PowerPoint are available on the internet, and they actually are all of rape survivors who are confronting their fears in a public way by sharing their details, and they should be commended for that. Thank you so much, and I will turn this over now to our chair.
Thank you so much, Ms. Brown. That was a very informative and very sobering presentation. Really appreciate it. We do have some questions.
Mhm.
The first question I have is, what was the most effective treatment that you have discovered through your role at the Advocacy Center for reducing self-blame?
Well, I mean, can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So I think that the most effective treatment is just a lot of reality testing, a lot of, really understanding why people are blaming themselves and confronting them. Talking about, if you guys are familiar with motivational interviewing, one of the things that we do in motivational interviewing is rolling with resistance, but also addressing discrepancies. So you want to really pay attention to the words that are coming out and listening for those key things that are aligned with rape myths and stereotype threats, and actually addressing them when they say them, if that makes sense.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that answer.
Mm-hmm.
The next question I have is, what suggestions do you have for parents and caregivers who want to prepare children to
Mm.
challenge these myths?
What was the last part?
What suggestions do you have for parents and caregivers who want to prepare children to challenge these myths?
That's a good question. Actually, and that's something that we talk about all the time in Chicago CAC. The first thing I'm going to say is we encourage parents to have very deliberate, clear conversations with their children. A lot of times, one of the things that we found out is that one of the things that delay disclosure is that many times our children do not even understand that they were being sexually abused. They don't have the language because people are uncomfortable about talking about sex with their kids. And so we talk in terms of cute terms, birds and the bees, and we give the private parts of our children cute names. What people don't know is that when we give cute names to the genitalia of our children, we also protect offenders. The example that I would give is that if a person, a child, a little girl, has been told by her parents that her vagina, and I always use terms that are clear and anatomically correct, if they call her vagina, say, a cookie, and this child is being abused, she may go to the school and tell her teacher or her social worker, my daddy touched my cookie. And let's think about what you might think as a parent or as a teacher who hears my daddy touched my cookie. I'm not likely going to think my child is being abused or this student is being abused. I might think daddy is greedy, selfish, eating her cookies, and he shouldn't, right? Which is why we encourage parents to actually really have really deliberate, really clear conversations about sex and sexual organs with their children. Because think of the other scenario where a 3-year-old comes to you and says, my daddy is touching my vagina. My daddy is touching my testicles. My daddy is touching my penis. Completely different reaction. And so the first thing I want to say is let's be honest with our kids. Let's talk to them about the realities and let's give women and men ownership over their bodies. That makes sense.
That's good. Okay, thank you very much for that answer. The next question I have is, do you have examples of characters in television or movies that have really defied traditional Black roles and challenged stereotypes?
Defied it. I'm gonna have to think about that. I mean, I know that there are. I'm not a big TV watcher. I'm a geek. I'm a sci-fi nut. So the first thing that came to me was the woman from the season TV show Eureka. She was smart. She was intelligent. Many of you guys have no idea what I'm talking about when you hear me say Eureka. I'm gonna have to think about some other concepts because I don't really watch TV much.
Mm-hmm.
I can give you the opposite answer. I can give you the answers that actually speak to stereotypes. But that's a good question. I'll think about it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you again, Ms. Brown. And as a reminder to our participants, you can still submit questions through the chat box in your attendee control panel. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to enter them now before I move on to describe our CE credit instructions. Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any additional questions. Thank you, Ms. Brown, and thank you to our participants for attending today's training. You'll receive a follow-up email shortly that includes the link to the webinar evaluation, the webinar recording, and post-test assessment for those seeking CE credits. Please stay on the webinar platform if you'd like to take the post-test assessment after a few of my announcements. If you're not yet an ADAA member, we invite you to view the many membership benefits that ADAA has to offer. ADAA members enjoy year-long access to continuing education programs, which are CE eligible, free access to special interest groups, including online peer consultation groups, promotion of your practice in ADAA's online Find a Therapist database, significant discount to ADAA's annual 4-day conference, website listings of your clinical trials, support groups, and publications, free online access to Depression and Anxiety, ADAA's official research journal, networking and collaborating with experts and colleagues from around the world, and much more. Please visit adaa.org to learn more. We would now also like to invite you to register for ADAA's annual conference on March 19th to March 22nd in San Antonio next year. On behalf of ADAA and our presenter, Ms. Brown, we thank you very much for joining us today.